Hi, my name is Dawn Miller, and I'm the Chief of Staff and CTO at the New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission. And I was asked today to speak to what the main challenges posed are by the digitalization of the taxi sector. For our agency, digitalization wasn't a problem itself. In New York City, this really represented just a massive expansion of our for-hire vehicle, or FHV, sector. This meant that the public demanded more oversight in this sector than had traditionally been in place when the FHV sector was significantly smaller and limited to more traditional dial-a-car services. One thing we had to do was make sure that safety protections applied evenly. For a long time, there had been hours of service regulations in the taxi industry to combat fatigue driving, but no similar regulation existed in the FHV industry. We created a new, updated, better to monitor fatigue driving regulation that would apply evenly to both sectors. Digitalization also meant we needed to ensure all drivers knew the rules of the road. For many years, taxi drivers had attended taxi school and taken a basic test on the rules of the road and customer service. As the FHV sector expanded, we expanded this education and a basic test on what you need to know to be a good driver to the FHV sector. We also needed to make sure consumers in all sectors were protected. One thing that apps like Uber and Via and Lyft introduced was dynamic pricing. And at the time, this was a very new idea in New York City for hire service. And some passengers were getting very surprised at the end of their ride when the fare was a lot higher than they expected. And at the time, the apps were providing information up front that, for example, your fare would be 4.7 times what it usually was, but this didn't mean that people necessarily knew what the price would be until the end of the ride. So we created a new consumer protection regulation that passengers had to be given a dollars and cents fare quote at the beginning of the trip, so they knew what they were getting into before they decided whether or not to take the trip. We also needed to ensure that this large sector wasn't off limits to a significant portion of our population. That meant we needed to put into requirements that they serve people with disabilities. Right now, there are virtually no wheelchair accessible FHVs, but this July, a new regulation will go into place so that all of these companies do have to provide meaningful, accessible service to this community. The growth in the FHV sector also meant that we needed more data to enforce our rules. TLC uses data that we've long had from the taxi industry to make informed policy and to enforce our regulations, including things like fatigue driving and investigating complaints from consumers. And so we found we needed similar data from the FHV companies to be able to do our jobs as regulators. These data are also very important to other agencies, such as the Department of Transportation, who uses these data to calculate traffic speeds and calculate the impacts of different street redesigns on traffic flow. Digitalization definitely led to a big increase in the number of vehicles on the road and the number of trips that were being performed each day. This was a good thing in a lot of ways. More people had an easy way to get where they needed to go. This included more access in neighborhoods that traditionally didn't have as many convenient options as you might have been able to find in the Manhattan Central Business District. Also, the technology was really good for actually matching passengers to share rides in a way that had been very difficult to achieve through traditional street hail methods. The downside of this, of course, has been some congestion. Between 2010 and 2018, 72,000 vehicles regulated by TLC were added to our city's streets. And this, along with other factors, we think is impacting congestion and doing things that are problematic, including decreasing bus speeds for public transit passengers. Another issue that has come from this tremendous growth is we're very concerned about an erosion of driver income, as a somewhat increased pie of trips has been spread among an even larger group of drivers. For a long time, we've had some rules on the books that attempt to protect income for yellow taxi drivers, but nothing similar in place for FHV drivers. This summer, TLC will be announcing a regulatory proposal to provide some earnings protections for the FHV industry, so that regardless of which sector you drive for, there are some earnings protections and worker protections in place. Thank you.